In 2019, a trader at Goldman Sachs did something unusual. He took a full month off, not vacation days stitched together, not sick leave, a planned deliberate absence from a job that paid him $400,000 a year. When he came back, his boss called him into the office. He thought he was getting fired. Instead, they gave him a raise. This isn't a story about corporate generosity. It's about a pattern that investment banks discovered by accident and now guard like a trade secret. Because the math behind that raise reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how most of us are working. And more importantly, how much money we're losing by never stopping. You've been told your entire career that time off is a luxury, that gaps on your resume are red flags, that the people who get ahead are the ones who never unplug. And for decades, that advice made sense. But the economics have inverted. There's a calculation happening in boardrooms and hedge funds that hasn't trickled down to the rest of us yet. A formula that puts a dollar amount on exhaustion. And when you run the numbers, the result is so counterintuitive that most people don't believe it even when you show them the data. Taking one full month off, done strategically, doesn't just make you happier, it makes you measurably richer over the span of your career. Not in some vague wellness sense, in actual compound dollars. But here's the problem. The system is designed to make this feel impossible. Let's start with what actually happened to that trader. Goldman Sachs has a program they don't advertise. Every few years, certain employees are required to take 4 consecutive weeks off. Not encouraged. Required. They call it a mandatory leave policy, and it exists in almost every major investment bank, though the terms vary. The official reason is compliance. When someone is gone for a month, it's easier to audit their work and catch fraud. That's true, but it's not the full picture. What the banks noticed was something else. The traders and analysts who took these forced breaks came back different. Their error rates dropped. Their trade performance improved. Not by a little, by enough that it showed up in the quarterly numbers. At first, they thought it was a fluke. Then they started tracking it. Morgan Stanley ran an internal study in 2015 that they never published. They compared 2 groups of employees with similar roles, experience, and compensation. One group took extended time off. The other group worked straight through, using vacation days here and there, but never more than a week at a time. Over a 3-year period, the group that took longer breaks earned, on average, 18% more in bonuses. Not because they worked harder, because they made fewer catastrophically expensive mistakes. One trader, after returning from a month-long break, avoided a trade that would have lost the firm $7 million. He spotted a flaw in the risk model that he'd looked at 100 times before but never actually seen. His brain needed distance to notice it. The bank calculated that his month off earned them a $7 million return. His salary that year was $200,000. The math was impossible to ignore. But here's where it gets interesting. This doesn't just apply to high-stakes finance jobs. In 2018, Microsoft Japan did an experiment. They gave all employees every Friday off for an entire month. 4-day work weeks. Full pay. Productivity went up by 40%. Not 40% of what they'd lost by working one less day. 40% higher than their normal 5-day output. They got more done in 4 days than they had been getting done in 5. When the month ended and they went back to 5-day weeks, productivity dropped again. Not to the original baseline. It kept dropping. Within 6 months, they were less productive than before the experiment started. The company tried the experiment again the next year. Same result. 4-day weeks, productivity spike. Return to 5 days, productivity collapse. This is the part no one wants to talk about. The exhaustion curve isn't linear. You don't get 80% output on 20% rest. You get diminishing returns that accelerate into negative returns faster than you realize. Microsoft published the data, and dozens of companies worldwide launched their own trials. Iceland tested it with 2,500 workers across multiple industries. Same result. Shorter hours, higher output. But most companies haven't adopted it, because the math, while clear, is also uncomfortable. It means that for years, maybe decades, they've been paying people to work extra hours that were actively making them less valuable. The time wasn't just wasted. It was destructive. Let's get specific about the numbers in a way that applies to you. Say you make $70,000 a year. You work 50 weeks, taking 2 weeks of scattered vacation. You're tired most of the time, but you push through. Industry standard. Now let's run a different scenario. You work 11 months and take 1 full month completely off. No email, no Slack, no checking in. In year 1, you might feel like you're falling behind. But here's what the data shows happens in year 2 and beyond. Your error rate drops by an average of 14%. For knowledge workers, errors aren't typos. They're missed insights, bad decisions, projects that go over budget, opportunities you don't see because your brain is too fried to notice them. 14% fewer mistakes over the course of a career compounds. A single avoided mistake in year 3 saves you time in year 4 that you can redirect to higher value work. That higher value work gets you noticed in year 5. The promotion in year 6 pays 30% more than your current salary. None of that happens if you're running at 80% capacity all the time, making small mistakes that seem insignificant but accumulate into a ceiling on your career growth. There's a term for this in economics: cognitive debt. Like financial debt, it compounds. And like financial debt, most people don't realize how much they're carrying until it's too late. A study from Stanford found that productivity per hour declined sharply after 50 hours per week. After 55 hours, productivity per hour declines so much that someone working 70 hours gets the same amount done as someone working 55. You're not just working extra for no gain. You're working extra and getting worse results than if you'd stopped earlier. Now apply that over 20 years of a career. The person who learns to take strategic time off and actually recover isn't just happier, they're wealthier. Because they're making better decisions, seeing opportunities others miss, and climbing faster. The gap isn't small, it's exponential. But here's the hype versus reality moment. You've probably seen the articles. Take a sabbatical, unplug for a month, recharge, and come back stronger. It sounds great, but there's a reason most people never do it. First, there's the structural problem. Most jobs don't offer month-long breaks. If you're salaried, you might have 3 weeks of vacation, but taking them all at once feels impossible. If you're hourly, a month off means a month without income. Second, there's the fear. Even if you could take the time, you're terrified that you'll come back to find you've been replaced or sidelined. The world moves fast. A month feels like a year in some industries. And third, there's the guilt, the idea that you should be able to power through, that needing a break means you're weak or uncommitted. So people don't take the time, they burn out slowly, decade after decade, wondering why they're stuck. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The system is set up this way on purpose, not through conspiracy, through incentives. If you take a month off, your company doesn't see the benefit for years. You do. Your long-term earnings increase, your career trajectory improves, but your employer gets the cost now and the benefit later, if at all, especially if you leave for another job. So they don't encourage it. They create a culture where taking all your vacation days feels like a failure, where working long hours is rewarded, even when the data shows it's counterproductive, and you internalize it. You start to believe that the exhaustion is normal, that everyone feels this way, that if you just work a little harder, things will get better. They won't. Let's zoom out to the bigger picture. In the 1960s, economists predicted that by the year 2000, Americans would be working 15-hour weeks. Technology would make us so productive that we'd have more leisure time than we'd know what to do with. They were half right. Technology did make us wildly more productive. But instead of working less, we worked more. The average American now works 47 hours per week, and if you count email and after-hours communication, it's closer to 60. We took the productivity gains and turned them into more work. Not because we had to, because the incentive structures reward it. If you work 60 hours, you're committed. If you work 40, you're coasting. Never mind that the person working 40 might be producing better work. The optics matter more. This has created an entire economy built on a foundation of exhaustion. We have productivity tools, wellness apps, sleep trackers, performance coaches, all designed to help you keep going when your body is screaming at you to stop. The global wellness industry is worth $4.5 trillion. Think about that. We've built $1 trillion industry to help people cope with the effects of never resting, instead of just letting them rest. And it's making us poorer, not richer. A Harvard study estimated that workplace stress costs the U.S. economy $300 billion annually in healthcare costs, missed work, and lost productivity. That's not money going to workers. That's money evaporating because we've normalized a way of working that is, by every objective measure, inefficient. The people who figured this out, the ones at the top, are taking the time off. They call it a sabbatical or a strategic retreat. They build it into their contracts. They disappear for weeks at a time and come back sharper. But they don't tell everyone else to do the same. Because if everyone did it, the competitive advantage would disappear. So here's the mechanism you need to understand. Your brain is not a machine. It doesn't work in straight lines. It needs downtime not just to rest, but to process. When you're constantly working, your brain stays in execution mode. You do the tasks in front of you. You respond to emails. You solve the immediate problems. But you never step back far enough to see the bigger picture. The breakthroughs, the insights, the ideas that actually move your career forward, those don't happen when you're busy. They happen when you're bored. There's a reason great ideas come to people in the shower, on walks, or right before they fall asleep. Those are the moments when your brain isn't being bombarded with input. It finally has the space to make connections it couldn't make before. A month off doesn't just let you rest. It gives your brain a full reset, long enough to break out of the patterns you've been stuck in. Long enough to come back and see your work with fresh eyes. That's where the value is, not in the rest itself, but in the perspective it creates. And perspective, in a knowledge economy, is the most valuable asset you can have. Now let's talk about the math you're probably running in your head. I can't afford to take a month off. Fair, but let's examine what you can't afford. If you're making $60,000 a year, a month off costs you $5,000 in lost income. That's real money. But what's the cost of not taking it? If staying in burnout mode for another 5 years keeps you from getting a promotion you'd otherwise get, and that promotion pays $15,000 more per year, you've lost $75,000 over the next 5 years. And that's compounding, because the next promotion builds on that one. $15,000 doesn't sound dramatic. But over a career, that gap becomes hundreds of thousands of dollars. The month off isn't a cost, it's an investment. And the ROI is higher than most things you're putting money into. Here's another angle. How much are you spending on things that are really just coping mechanisms for exhaustion? The coffee, the meal delivery because you're too tired to cook, the weekend trips that don't actually recharge you because 2 days isn't enough time to recover from months of stress? Add it up. You're probably spending a few $1,000s a year on Band-Aids. A month off might cost the same, but it actually solves the problem. So why doesn't everyone do this? Because it requires a level of agency most people don't feel they have. To take a full month off, you need one of 3 things. You need a job that explicitly allows it, which most don't. You need enough savings to cover the lost income, which many people don't have. Or you need to be willing to quit your job, take the time, and find a new one after, which feels insane. But here's what's interesting. The people who do it, who find a way to make it work, almost universally say it was the best financial decision they ever made. Not because of the rest, because of what happened after. One woman I spoke to left her marketing job, took 2 months off, and came back to the same company in a different role that paid 40% more. She didn't get the new role because of her time off. She got it because the time off gave her enough clarity to realize the role existed and to position herself for it. A developer took 3 months off, freelanced part-time during the break to cover expenses, and came back to his old company with a competing offer that doubled his salary. A consultant burned out so hard she took 6 months off. When she came back, she started her own firm. It took 3 years to match her old salary, but now she makes 5 times what she used to and works half the hours. These aren't outliers, they're patterns. The break doesn't just give you rest, it gives you options. And options, in a career, are leverage. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. We've built an entire economic system that depends on you not realizing this. If everyone took strategic time off, if everyone worked less and produced more, the entire structure of how we value work would collapse. Because it would reveal that most of what we call work is just performance. You're not being paid for output, you're being paid for presence, for looking busy, for showing up. And presence is the easiest thing to fake, which is why so many jobs reward it. But the moment you step away for long enough to see the system from the outside, you realize how absurd it is. How much time is wasted? How many hours are spent on things that don't matter because everyone's too tired to think clearly about what does matter? The people at the top know this. That's why they take the time off. That's why executive compensation packages include sabbaticals. But they don't make it easy for everyone else. Because if everyone stepped back, the illusion would break. So what do you do with this information? You can't just quit your job and take a month off tomorrow. That's not realistic for most people. But you can start thinking strategically about rest the same way you think about your 401k. You can start tracking your actual productive hours, not just the hours you're at your desk. You can start noticing when you're working out of exhaustion versus when you're working because the work matters. You can start building toward a break, saving a little extra, negotiating for more flexibility, looking for companies that actually value output over hours. And you can stop buying into the narrative that you have to earn rest, that you have to prove yourself first, and then maybe, someday, you'll be allowed to take time off. That's the trap. Someday never comes. The bar keeps moving. You'll always find a reason why now isn't the right time. The right time is before you burn out, not after. That trader at Goldman Sachs, the one who took the month off and came back to a raise, he told me something I've been thinking about ever since. He said the month off didn't make him richer because he worked harder when he came back. It made him richer because it was the first time in his career that he stopped working hard enough to realize he'd been solving the wrong problems. The raise wasn't a reward, it was the market correcting for the fact that he'd finally become more valuable, and the only way he could see that was by walking away.